Good morning and welcome to the final reflection for Holy Week. Today I'd like to take you through the retelling of the Passion of Jesus through his mother's eyes to perhaps give you another perspective, another way of putting yourself into the story, because this story happened for each one of us. I first used this when I was a school chaplain at the Venerable Bede in Sunderland, so it's been 10 years since it's been used. So I invite you to suspend your usual sense of disbelief and skepticism of things and lose yourself in the narrative. Walk beside Jesus' mother and watch the events unfold through her eyes and through her heart. You could see them making their way up the hill. It looked like a snake slithering along the curves of the path, their torches glowing in the night. Judas, one of the disciples, and the son of Simon Iscariot, was leading them, soldiers and police from the temple. All those people and all those weapons to arrest one man who had no weapons, at least no weapons they would recognize. Jesus went with them meekly, even willingly, and when Peter impetuously attacked that man and cut off his ear, Jesus healed the man and told his disciples not to fight. They took my son to the high priest's house. Peter and one of the other disciples had followed the crowd. Peter stayed in the courtyard. Several people thought they recognized him, but Peter denied knowing Jesus. 3 times he denied it, just as Jesus had said earlier in the evening. Peter had assured Jesus he would never deny him. He would even die with him. But the pressure, the fear, the terror of that night clouded Peter's mind. He heard the rooster crow after his 3rd denial. His heart broke. I knew he was scared. I knew he really didn't mean it. Jesus saw Peter's heart and knew that although Peter was one of the strongest disciples, one of the most loyal, this night was like no other, and Peter was not himself. In some ways, it was almost like Peter was denying the whole night was happening. It was the worst night of our lives. Meanwhile, Jesus was being questioned by the high priests. But what a charade. They could have gotten lots of witnesses to what my son did. How many people did he heal? How many people heard his message of love and forgiveness and justice for the poor and the outcast? What they were doing was a travesty. But Jesus, my Jesus, remained calm through the whole thing. I kept wondering when he was going to let them have it. I wanted him to tell them who he was, but he stood there and he took their abuse. Next, they took him to Pilate. Pilate wasn't a bad man, but his position was vulnerable. He had to answer to Caesar, and he just saw Jesus as someone who was stirring up trouble. If he ignored the Jewish leaders, they could cause problems for him. However, he was unusually fair with my son. Pilate knew there was no crime present that warranted death, so he had Jesus flogged. It was bloody. It was painful. The soldiers took great delight in beating Jesus. A weaker man might have died. Perhaps it would have been better if he had died, because the man I saw standing next to Pilate bore little resemblance to my son. The crowd's cry of "Crucify him" rang in my ears for days. It was such a long walk to the hill through the city. He was weakened from the beating. The blood soaked through his clothing. His head was bleeding from that stupid crown of thorns. I didn't think my heart could break anymore, but my pain was nothing in comparison to his. The Jews didn't like the inscription on the cross, but Pilate was adamant about the wording. Jesus was the King of the Jews, and they didn't recognize him. He went willingly. He didn't fight back. He struggled with that cross. Finally, the soldiers got someone to help him, but it was almost too little too late. I watched him and I remembered the night he was born. The stars, the angels, the shepherds, the peace. I remembered marveling at how perfect he was. Those tiny little fingers, the cute little toes, the perfect ears. They didn't stick out like some newborns. And that smell on the top of his head, you know the one. That smell that touches something deep inside you and lets you know things are all right. I wanted to go back to that night. I wanted the whole thing to start over again. I didn't want to be there watching my son struggle through the streets of Jerusalem to his death. Then suddenly, they were nailing those hands to the cross. They put a nail through his feet. They were casting lots to see who got his tunic, blood-soaked as it was. I stood at the foot of the cross with some friends and one of the disciples who knew where the others were. They'd scattered in the garden the night before. Jesus looked at us and gave me to the disciple. Even in his own excruciating pain, he thought of others. He knew I needed someone to take me in, and he provided for me. I was grateful, but still wished I was back 30-some years, cradling my new baby in my arms. It is finished. 3 little words, so final. What was finished? How could it be finished? It had just begun a few days ago, hadn't it? It was finished. He was dead. The one I gave birth to. The one who had the cutest smile. The one who brought me flowers from the garden. The one who crafted the most beautiful things from wood. The one who healed so many people. The one promised by God was dead. I held him one last time, cradling him again. The once perfect hands bloodied, the holes where the nails went through his wrists, his head battered and bloodied as well. This was my son, the one who had been promised, the Messiah we'd been promised. I was promised he was the Son of God. How could God let this happen? One of the disciples, Joseph of Arimathea, He was a wealthy man. He asked Pilate if he could take the body. Pilate gave permission, and Joseph and Nicodemus wrapped him in a linen shroud with some spices, as was our custom. They laid him in a tomb that Joseph had. It hadn't been used before. I watched them as they secured the tomb. It was the day of preparation. We had to get ready for the Sabbath. Frankly, I didn't want to leave. Part of me wanted to be in that tomb with Jesus. I felt like my world had collapsed, as if part of me had died with him. Usually the Sabbath is a joyous time, a time of celebration. There was nothing to celebrate this Sabbath. It was finished. Everything was finished. There was nothing left to do but pray. And so I remembered the prayer that Jesus had taught us, and I prayed, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.